Purdue Pharma is the maker of the highly addictive opioid OxyContin. The family that owns the company, the Sacklers, have been embroiled in lawsuits and multi-million-dollar settlements to keep the company's role in the opioid crisis out of the public eye. The family is well known for their philanthropy, but many of the prestigious institutions that received money from the Sacklers are distancing themselves and have decided to stop accepting their gifts. I recently spoke with Barry Meyer, who has covered the opioid epidemic, the Sackler family, and the ongoing legal cases for the New York Times. He's also the author of Painkiller, An Empire of Deceit and the Origin of America's Opioid Epidemic. A new edition was published in 2018. Let's start with kind of where we're at right now. It seems that there are lots and lots of people and cities and companies suing the Sackler family as well as Purdue Pharma for the disaster that's happened with the opioid epidemic.
Yes, it's very hard to keep track at this point because there's been a landslide of cases, upwards of more than 1,000, I believe, at this point, where either Purdue Pharma or the Sackler family is named in those lawsuits.
Now, those lawsuits brought the family on board partly because the family had an active role in managing what was this crisis, and we started to see that in dribs and drabs from email dumps, and you saw that here's the last name Sackler, here's what they're doing in marketing this drug.
Yeah, one of the remarkable things about this story is that for a large part of it, really over the last 2 decades when I first got involved, the Sacklers were able to create this illusion that they were hands-off, they were basically the benefactors of this country, they were the philanthropists that took money that they made and gave it to museums and to medical schools. But now we're seeing that they were sort of up to their eyeballs in the operations of the company. In fact, there are emails where you have like subordinates, managers, vice presidents, kind of screaming that Richard Sackler, one of the family members, is like micromanaging the operation.
Is it possible then for some sort of grand settlement to be reached? I mean, if we're talking about 1,000-something lawsuits, that could be billions and billions of dollars. I'm assuming that this company, in the meantime, would say, sorry, we're going to have to declare bankruptcy just to shield themselves.
I think that's a very good possibility. I covered the tobacco industry litigation when I was at the New York Times, and there you had a manageable number of plaintiffs. You had the 48 states and a few cities, and so they were able to craft a global settlement. Here you have states, you have counties, you have Native American tribes, you have various localities, and I don't see how they're going to negotiate the type of global settlement of these cases that's going to lead to peace for the companies. It's either going to have to be negotiated piecemeal, they're going to have to settle with some of the major defendants and take their chances with others, or simply go into bankruptcy and use that as a shield to hold off the litigation.
Most major cities around the country, possibly around different parts of the world, the Sackler name is something that they see as they walk into an art museum or a gallery, right? What's happened to that name in that world?
Well, they're seeing it in a very different way now. They're seeing it as a company, as a family, that were the beneficiaries both of legitimate drug sales and illegal drug sales. And one of the conundrums that faces the Sacklers right now, and part of the reason why certain museums are beginning to reject their donations, is the question of what did this family do with the money that they received from drug sales that clearly were not legitimate? I mean, they made millions, if not billions, from legitimate drug sales, and no one really questions that. The question is, what did they do with the money, or how did they handle the money that came from sales, from street sales of OxyContin? Did they just say, well, we don't have any control over that, we'll take the money anyway? Or did they ever have qualms about that?
What can happen here? I mean, you've talked to kind of the end user, the end victims, the families that are surviving. That seems a pretty long stretch from the kind of high-minded art world, right? So the person that might be in Appalachia somewhere who's suffered at the hands of this drug, what is their relief? What can they get?
You know, I think the best one can hope for is that there are monies set aside through this litigation for drug treatment. I mean, that is the benefit that will flow from this litigation. It's not going to be a benefit that will make plaintiffs' lawyers rich. That's the worst thing that could happen from this. I mean, I hope that the vast majority of this money is going to go into drug treatment. I think the other benefit that will accrue if attorney generals and plaintiffs' lawyers force these documents to become public is that we as a society will know finally what happened during this epidemic. I mean, we're dealing with the greatest public health crisis of the 21st century. We don't know how the Sacklers comported themselves during it. They claim, you know, we have clean hands. We're now seeing documents suggesting otherwise. The last thing, the worst thing that could happen is for these cases to be settled and for these documents to be once again sealed from public view. The people that lost loved ones to this epidemic, we as a society really do need to know what the Sacklers knew, how they behaved, the decisions that they made, not just within Purdue, but how these other executives behaved. You know, the people that ran Johnson & Johnson, the people that ran the big drug distributors, you know, they were dumping tens of millions of pain pills into places like West Virginia. What kind of decisions did they make inside their corporate offices? This litigation could flush those answers out.
Is this having an effect on the rest of the pharma industry? Obviously, this was a much smaller company. It had much more of a family control, unlike the super big ones that we're all familiar with. But considering now that every email that's being brought out, I'm assuming if you're at Merck or at Pfizer, you're sitting there thinking, well, do I want to type this right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been many years since anyone put anything in an email that could be damaging. They, you know, people have gotten wise to that. However, there is information, I suspect, within emails that were written, say, a decade ago, or 12 years ago, or even 8 years ago, where we can see the corporate decisions that are being made. I mean, one of the curious things about this whole epidemic was back in 2007, when Purdue settled the lawsuit against it. The Justice Department was going to, originally, the prosecutors in the case were recommending charging 3 top executives of Purdue Pharma with felonies, you know, crimes that could send them to prison. The top officials at the Justice Department blocked that from happening. They required them basically to only charge them with misdemeanors. So basically people ended up with a slap in the wrist. And, you know, I think hopefully going forward, we'll take away a lesson that, you know, corporate executives that knowingly allow drugs to be sold on the street, that don't prevent that from happening, really bear the same sort of criminal liability that street drug dealers do and should be dealt with in the same way.
Finally, I know your reporting on this has spanned decades now. What are you looking forward to? What's the next shoe to drop?
The truth. I think we're at a point where we as a society need to know the truth. We need to know the truth about what the Sacklers knew. We need to know the truth about what the executives of these other companies knew. And, you know, we need to know when we walk past a museum that has the Sackler name on it, or a medical school that has the Sackler name on it, what did this family know? I mean, it's lovely to walk into the Metropolitan Museum and see the Temple of Dendur. I do that all the time. I love archaeology. But I want to know about the decisions this family made that allowed them to make the money, that purchased this art, that, you know, purchased the rights for them to put their names on these buildings.
Barry Meyer, thanks so much.
It's been my pleasure.